The Life of Katsuki Bakugo, aka Kacchan, My Hero Academia. Katsuki Bakugo, also known as Kacchan by his childhood friends, and his hero name Great Explosion Murder God Dynamight, is a student at Class 1A at UA High School, training to become a pro hero. He is the deuteragonist of the series. Welcome to the Amagi. In today's video, we're going over the life of Katsuki Bakugo. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media accounts. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Background. Katsuki Bakugo grew up in the same neighborhood as Izuku Midoriya since they were young children. Izuku and Katsuki's other childhood friends gave him the nickname Kacchan. Izuku and the other boys always looked up to Katsuki because of his energy, confidence, and natural-born talents. Because of this praise, Katsuki developed a rather arrogant and self-inflated view of himself and would often pick on Izuku and gave him the name Deku. Despite this, Izuku continued to follow him around. Katsuki always admired All Might when he was young because the #1 hero would always win against the odds. While watching a video of him at the electronics store, Katsuki tells his friends that All Might is the greatest hero because of his ability to achieve victory. Sometime later, Katsuki defeated a few 4th graders as a 1st grader who bumped into him. With Izuku looking on, Katsuki says that the most amazing hero always wins no matter what. Once Katsuki developed his quirk, his aggressive tendencies transformed into heinous bullying. He was constantly praised for his powerful quirk and other talents. As a result of this, he developed a twisted superiority complex as a young child. Believing himself to be better than everyone else, Katsuki looked down on Izuku especially because he lacked a quirk altogether. Despite this, Izuku still considered the two of them to be friends at the time, but things escalated when Izuku tried to help Katsuki after he fell off a small bridge into a stream. Izuku offered a helping hand, but Katsuki's pride caused him to take this as an insult. He believed that Izuku made him appear as if he needed aid from someone who was beneath him. This would strain the relationship between the two for years to come. Entrance Exam Arc. During class at Aldera Junior High School, the teacher announces that all students will graduate, and Katsuki contends the notion that he's of the same status as his peers. He refers to his classmates as beneath him, and tells them all that he alone will attend UA High School and surpass the #1 hero, All Might. The teacher discloses that Izuku is also attempting to get into UA, much to Katsuki's displeasure. Katsuki berates Izuku and uses his quirk to scare him by exploding his desk. He tells Izuku that because he's quirkless, he will never succeed at anything, especially getting into UA. Katsuki and 2 of his friends confront Izuku after class. They take his hero notebook and Katsuki burns it before tossing it out the window into a fish pond. Katsuki reminds Izuku that only he himself is destined to reach that school, and Izuku is just the stepping stone for his greatness. Before leaving the room, Katsuki warns Izuku not to apply to UA at all. After school, Katsuki and company try to decide what to do for fun and ponder if Katsuki was too harsh on Izuku. Katsuki ignores them, only replying that he cannot stand Izuku's optimism and someone needs to teach him how the world works. The boys suggest that they skip class and go to the arcade, but Katsuki refuses because it would ruin his chances of getting into UA. Just then, the sludge villain captures Katsuki and goes on a rampage through the city. Katsuki tries to break free using his quirk, but isn't able to, only setting fire to the area around him and making it more difficult for heroes to intervene. As people and heroes are watching, unable to help Katsuki, Izuku rushes to help him. While Katsuki demands to know why Izuku is helping him, Izuku states that he could not stand by and let Katsuki die. The two are ultimately saved by All Might, who destroys the villain while freeing Katsuki at the same time. Afterward, Izuku is scolded for his recklessness, and Katsuki is praised for his quirk, but the latter only frowns at him in silence. Later, he finds Izuku and yells at him for trying to help. Katsuki claims he was fine on his own, and he may owe him, but he was never going to apologize for his previous actions of destroying his book, and voiced he didn't need any help before angrily storming away. Months later, Katsuki arrives to take part in the UA entrance exam. While walking in, Katsuki notices Izuku walking in and tells him to move out of the way. Later in the auditorium, Katsuki is seated next to Izuku, whom he has to tell to shut up after he starts geeking out over Present Mike being the examiner. Katsuki is also upset by the fact that he and Izuku must participate in separate areas because Katsuki was excited to crush him. After the exam begins, judges note that Katsuki took on the exam using brute force and combat ability. By the test's end, Katsuki scored 77 combat points, the most out of any participant. He also received the lowest amount of rescue points, as he was the only student not to get any rescue points at all. Examiners were still impressed by his performance. Quirk Apprehension Test Arc. At the end of Aldera's academic year, Katsuki and Izuku are praised by their teacher for being the only two students in school history to get accepted into UA. Katsuki angrily confronted Izuku and demanded to know what tricks Izuku used to pass the exam. Katsuki wanted to be the only one from their school to attend UA and threatens for Izuku to change schools. However, Izuku stands up to Katsuki for the first time by refusing to withdraw, claiming that he now has someone who believes in him and he won't let them down. April arrives and the UA academic year begins. On the very first day, Katsuki argued with Tenya Ida about having his feet on the desk. Ida tried to introduce himself calmly, but Katsuki recognizes him as just another stepping stone and threatens to crush him. Their disagreement is ended when they see Izuku entering, with him being shocked both are his classmates. Very soon, the teacher Shota Aizawa arrives and takes them out to the PE field for a quirk assessment test. Shota Aizawa uses Katsuki as an example to explain the test. Throughout middle school, physical tests were always given without quirks in mind. This led to Katsuki only throwing about 65 meters on his original ball toss. This time, Katsuki uses his quirk to throw the ball, and his explosive toss sends the ball over 700 meters. The class goes through several different physical tests, including a 50-meter dash and a standing long jump. Katsuki uses his quirk to excel in both and claims that his quirk is the most versatile in the class. When Izuku takes the pitching test, Katsuki mocks him for being powerless, but is shocked when Izuku uses a quirk to toss the ball as far as he did. Katsuki questioned why Izuku never got his quirk as a kid and angrily tried to attack Izuku for an explanation, but Shota stops him from doing so using his quirk and capture weapon. Battle Trial Arc. The next day at school during hero basic training, Katsuki and the other students suit up in their hero costumes for combat training. Katsuki is teamed up with Tenya Ida on Team D and must face off with Team A, consisting of Izuku Midoriya and Ochako Uraraka. Team D is assigned the villainous mission to protect a warhead inside a building. Team A is assigned the task of stopping the villains by capturing the payload or the villains themselves. As combat training begins, Katsuki still ponders over Izuku's quirk and started to get angry as he believed Izuku was intentionally hiding his abilities from him for years and was playing him. He goes off on his own and attempts to ambush Izuku and Ochako. Izuku evades and saves Ochako even though Katsuki manages to burn off his mask. Katsuki tries to attack Izuku again, but he's countered and slammed to the ground by the ladder. Izuku reveals to the surprised Katsuki that the same notebook Katsuki previously burned and threw out had notes about Katsuki's moves along with other heroes, which he memorized and knew ways to counter them. Finally standing his ground to Katsuki, Izuku tells him that he's no longer the same kid Katsuki used to bully, and the name Deku would be a hero name, as Katsuki's angered at his declaration. Katsuki attacks again, but his moves are countered once more, and he's nearly caught by the capturing weapon, but breaks free. Then Izuku retreats, forcing Katsuki to search the building alone, giving Uraraka a chance to escape and find Tenya. Tenya tries to contact Katsuki, but he's too focused on attacking Izuku that he ignores him. Katsuki eventually finds Izuku demanding to use his quirk while revealing information about his own. He explains that his explosion quirk works by detonating the nitroglycerin he sweats. The gauntlets on his costume store this nitro sweat, and once they're full, Katsuki can fire off a huge blast. All Might cautions him not to use the attack, but Katsuki does so anyway, though he minimizes the damage. Izuku narrowly evades, and the blast destroys a large portion of the building. All Might warns Katsuki should he use that attack again, his team will be disqualified. Katsuki takes the duel into close quarters, where he easily dominates Izuku in combat while berating him. Katsuki's fighting style garners him commendation as a villain from his peers watching alongside All Might, though they note he's going too far. Katsuki again demands that Izuku use his quirk and questions whether Izuku feels he's too good for him now. This irritates Izuku, who expresses that he has always felt Katsuki was better, and that's why he wants to beat him. Filled with emotion, both fighters rush each other for a final clash as Izuku uses his quirk, which delights Katsuki as he moves to attack. Knowing he can't defeat Katsuki at close range, Izuku alerts Ochako and uses his quirk to smash the ceiling from every building story above him. The shockwave creates enough debris for Ochako to use on the floor above. She uses the opening to grab the weapon and secure the victory for Team A. In disbelief at his loss, Katsuki begins to panic and hyperventilate at the idea of losing to Izuku for once. He's soon calmed and consoled by All Might, who tells Katsuki that it doesn't matter whether he won or lost, but that he takes a look back to reflect on his experience and learn from it. Katsuki watches the next match between Team B and Team I. He's visibly stunned by Shoto Todoroki's incredible quirk and starts to wonder if he's really the best after seeing that amazing power. After all the battle trials are completed and the school day is done, Katsuki storms out of the school but is closely followed by Izuku. Once he catches up, Katsuki asks if he will gloat, but Izuku reveals that he hasn't been deceiving Katsuki about his quirk. Izuku goes on to reveal that he got his quirk from someone else and can't yet control it, but Katsuki refuses to believe that as the whole thing sounded ridiculous. In response, Katsuki admits his failure and inferiority to others and acknowledges he can't defeat Shoto in a head-to-head fight. His pride has been damaged, but Katsuki declares that he will never lose again and will follow his dreams to become the best. All Might arrives and tries to console Katsuki again, but this time Katsuki tells him off and promises to surpass the #1 hero without his help. U.S.J. Arc. The next day of school, the reporters looking for an interview from All Might recognize Katsuki. They ask if he's the victim from the sludge villain incident, but he only responds by warning them to walk away. In Class 1A's homeroom, Aizawa criticizes Katsuki's performance during combat training. He says Katsuki has the talent and tells him not to sulk over his defeat. Next, Aizawa asks the class to choose a president. Katsuki tries to get himself elected, but ends up losing to Izuku. Irritated, Katsuki demands to know who voted for him. During Hero Basic Training class, Aizawa informs the class that they'll undergo yet another training exercise. However, this time, it'll be a rescue training event held at an outside facility. The students suit up in their costumes and head out on a bus to the training area. Katsuki is teased by his classmates on the ride there. Denki Kaminari and Tsuyu Asui both comment on Katsuki's repulsive attitude, outraging him. When the students arrive at the facility, Rescue Hero 13 greets them. Katsuki listens to her explanation of how she built the facility, and it's named the Unforeseen Simulation Joint. She goes on to lecture the students about using their powers to save people, but is ultimately interrupted by the arrival of several villains. Aizawa orders the class to evacuate with 13, but they're cut off by an ominous villain using his warping quirk. He introduces himself as Kurogiri of the League of Villains. Katsuki and Eiichiro hastily attack the villain, but their attacks don't affect his intangible body. Kurogiri counters by using his quirk to separate the class into many different simulation zones. Katsuki ends up with Eiichiro in the Ruin Zone. Together, Katsuki and Eiichiro easily defeat the villains trying to ambush them in the Ruin Zone. While discussing what to do next, they disagree on their next course of action. Katsuki wants to defeat Kurogiri and cut off the villain's escape route, while Eiichiro desires to save his classmates. A villain tries to take Katsuki by surprise, but he swiftly counters and routs the villain. He reassures Eiichiro that their peers can handle themselves against the weak criminals. Eiichiro is impressed by Katsuki's calm demeanor, but this only angers Katsuki, who claims he's always that way. Eiichiro continues by stating that perhaps Katsuki is saying to have faith in their peers, and decides to accompany Katsuki's search for Kurogiri. They arrive at the Central Plaza just in time to save the day. Kurogiri almost warps Izuku away, but Katsuki swoops in and blasts the villain while yelling for Izuku to get out of his way. Katsuki pins Kurogiri down by his neck armor and explains that he's already discovered the villain's weakness. Kurogiri's body is not fully intangible. He hides his physical form under the black smoke from his quirk. By aiming his attack at Kurogiri's neck armor, Katsuki was able to exploit his weakness. He warns the villain not to move, or else he'll blow him to pieces. Tomura Shigaraki orders Nomu to free Kurogiri, and Katsuki isn't fast enough to react to Nomu. He's saved when All Might takes the brunt of Nomu's attack, but Kurogiri is freed as a result. Katsuki watches the ensuing battle in awe, where All Might uses his incredible power to defeat Nomu. Katsuki comments on how intense the situation is and decides to remove himself from the rest of the fight. However, Izuku rushes to All Might's side. Katsuki notices the incredible speed Izuku uses to confront the villains. Izuku and All Might are saved when Tenya returns to the U.S.J. with pro-heroes as reinforcements. Katsuki is then instructed to leave with the rest of the class, and they meet outside the facility. UA Sports Festival Arc. 2 days after the attack on the U.S.J., Katsuki and his classmates return to school and talk about the attack. Minoru Mineta complains about his fear, and Katsuki responds by insulting him and telling him to shut up. After Shota Aizawa returns to class, Katsuki and his peers are lectured about the importance of the upcoming UA Sports Festival. At the end of the day, Katsuki confronts a mob of students blocking Class 1A's exit. Katsuki realizes these students must be there to scout their competition for the festival because Class 1A survived a real villain attack. He tells the crowd that he's a real future pro and for them to move aside, calling them extras. Katsuki is approached by Hitoshi Shinso, who says that although some students may be scouting, he's there to declare war on them. Another student, this time from Class 1B of the hero course, Tetsu, yells at Katsuki for being arrogant, but Katsuki ignores him and walks away. Eiichiro says Katsuki can't leave after making everyone hate Class 1A. Katsuki does so anyway, saying that the people don't matter, and the only thing that's important is that he defeats them all. For the next 2 weeks before the festival, Katsuki trains at the Replica City District. When the day of the UA Sports Festival arrives, before the festival begins, first-year chief referee Midnight calls Katsuki to the stage to lead the pledge. Instead, he simply announces that he'll win the games, angering his fellow competitors and generating boos from the crowd. Midnight announces the preliminaries will be an obstacle race 4 kilometers around the stadium, which immediately begins after the rules are explained. Shoto gets out to an early lead by freezing the stadium's exit, but Katsuki avoids the ice by using his explosions to propel himself past them. Using his explosions to move through the air, Katsuki flies over top the villain bot blockade. He's followed close behind by Hantasero and Fumikage Tokuyami. Katsuki reaches the next obstacle soon after, the fall, a canyon laced with tight ropes. Katsuki avoids using the tight ropes altogether by flying over the canyon completely. After Shoto reaches the final leg of the race, the minefield, and is forced to slow down, Katsuki finally catches up to him. Then suddenly, a giant explosion goes off, propelling Izuku past both of them. Although Katsuki and Shoto momentarily catch back up, Izuku uses a second explosion to stop them for just enough time to cross the finish line first. Katsuki crosses the finish line after Shoto, placing him in third. Katsuki is enraged after losing to Izuku again, but he qualifies for the second round, the cavalry battle. While everyone scrambles to make teams for the second round event, many students from Class 1A try to convince Katsuki to form a team with them. However, he's unable to recall their names or their quirks, making them comment negatively on his ego. Then Eijiro Kirishima asks to join, but Katsuki forgets his name as well and greets him as Dumb Hair. After correcting him and pointing out his spiky hair, Eijiro pitches his quirk's compatibility to Katsuki's. Katsuki says he needs someone with guts, and Eijiro replies that they should go after Izuku's 10 million points together, exciting Katsuki. Team Bakugo is formed with Katsuki as the rider and Mina Ashido, Hantasero, and Eijiro as his horses. After the cavalry battle begins, Katsuki flies through the air and tries to attack Team Midoriya, who are flying using a jetpack and Ochako's quirk. Katsuki nearly blasts the team, but he's blocked by Fumikage Tokuyami's Dark Shadow quirk. Unfamiliar with Fumikage, Katsuki is frustrated as he asks what his Dark Shadow is. Katsuki falls out of the air but is caught by Hanta's tape quirk. Soon after, Katsuki's headband is stolen by Neito Monoma from Class 1B. Neito takes a moment to explain that Class 1B purposely placed low in the obstacle race to scout their Class 1A rivals, calling them fools for obsessing for winning over the preliminaries. He continues to taunt Katsuki by recognizing him as the villain from the Sludge Villain incident. Now absolutely livid, Katsuki explains that his team has a new agenda, to annihilate Team Monoma before they go after Izuku. Katsuki attacks Neito, but the latter evades and then counters using an explosion of his own. When Katsuki tries to blast him again, Neito uses Eishiro's hardening power to block it. This forces Katsuki to realize that Neito's quirk is the ability to copy other quirks. When Katsuki tries to attack again, his team is immobilized by Neito's classmate, Kojiro Bondo. Mina uses her quirk to free the team, and Katsuki uses an explosion to propel himself at Team Monoma. One of their members, Kosei Suburaba, uses his solid air quirk to repel Katsuki, but only for a few moments. Katsuki punches through the air shield and grabs 2 of the headbands around Neito's neck as he tries to flee. Then Hanta recovers Katsuki using his tape quirk. Undeterred by his team's elevation into second place, Katsuki orders his team to continue pursuing Neito. Katsuki claims that he'll go after Izuku's 10 million points after they recover the headband Neito stole from them. Katsuki strategically uses his teammates' quirks to close the distance between the two teams. Kosei tries to stop him, but Katsuki blasts through the air shield and takes Neito's last headband. Even after securing more than enough points to advance, Katsuki urges his team to go after Izuku's team. With only seconds remaining, Katsuki's team joins the fray, already brewing between Team Midoriya and Team Todoroki. Katsuki notices that Team Todoroki has secured the 10 million points and damns Shoto for it. Katsuki tries to go after Shoto, but time runs out. Despite placing second in the event and moving on to the finals, Katsuki is extremely frustrated after failing to be the undeniable champion of the round. During the lunch break, Katsuki secretly eavesdrops on Shoto's conversation with Izuku in the student entrance corridor. Shoto explains that his father created him to usurp All Might, and he plans to win the festival without using his father's power. Katsuki leaves after Izuku replies that he'll do his best to defeat Shoto. Midnight reveals that the finals will be a one-on-one fighting tournament and everyone draws lots for their matchups. Katsuki is set to fight Ochako Uraraka, but he fails to recognize her name and questions who she might be. 7 matches later, Katsuki takes to the ring to face his opponent, Ochako Uraraka. He warns Pink Cheeks to withdraw from the match because he isn't going to hold anything back. She refuses and starts the engagement by rushing Katsuki. He immediately blows her away with an explosion and repeats that she should have dropped out of the tournament. He blasts her again only to realize he's exploded only her jacket. She threw it through the smoke as a distraction and nearly gets the drop on Katsuki. Thanks to his incredible reaction time, he's able to blast Ochako away before she can touch him and use her quirk to send him out of bounds. Ochako continues to rush Katsuki over and over again, and although Katsuki continues to blast her repeatedly, she continues her assault without resting between attacks. The crowd starts to boo Katsuki for being too rough, but Aizawa calls out the man who starts the uproar. He explains that Katsuki's fearness is an acknowledgement of his opponent's strength, and he's simply doing everything he can to keep Ochako at bay so he can come out on top. As the smoke clears from all the explosions, Ochako remains undeterred, still standing from Katsuki's barrage. Katsuki keeps his guard up, uneasy that Ochako isn't dead yet. This time, rather than dash at him, Ochako thanks Katsuki for keeping his focus on her. Confused, Katsuki glances up to see a great amount of debris floating high above them. As she releases her quirk, causing all the debris to fall down towards Katsuki, Ochako rushes at him to try and capitalize on the opening. Without any other choice, Katsuki unleashes a large, powerful explosion that repels all the debris, horrifying his opponent as she gets blown away as well. Katsuki figured Ochako would have some sort of plan since he now remembered her as being friends with Izuku and quietly states to himself that this was a close call. Katsuki rushes Ochako, claiming it's time to get serious. She tries to stand up and fight, but ends up collapsing. He keeps his guard up even as she crawls towards him, but Ochako ultimately falls unconscious and Katsuki is declared the winner. On his way to the student section, Katsuki happens upon Izuku in the hallway and is immediately irritated by his presence. He accuses Izuku of providing Ochako with her annoying strategy, but Izuku angrily denies it and says that if the battle was harder than Katsuki had anticipated, then it's because of Ochako's own plan and not his. Katsuki eventually makes his way back to the stands with his classmates. As the match between Izuku and Shoto begins, Eijiro returns from his victory to sit down with his class. Eijiro tells Katsuki that they'll fight next, to which Katsuki replies that he'll kill him. Eijiro laughs it off and then sarcastically says it must be nice that Katsuki and Shoto can use attacks that blast the entire stadium. Hanta adds that they also don't need to pause between attacks. Katsuki calls them morons and explains that just like sprinting drains your breath, quirks can be worn out because they're physical abilities too. Then Katsuki thinks to himself about his own limits and muses over that he designed his costume so that he could fire off stronger blasts than his body could normally allow him to. When the match ends, Katsuki is taken aback by Izuku's defeat. As the second round proceeds, Katsuki faces Eijiro in his next match. Katsuki and Eijiro trade blows, but Eijiro's hardened body dampens Katsuki's explosions, while Katsuki's cheek is cut open by Eijiro's hardened punch. Katsuki is forced on the defensive because of Eijiro's defensive abilities, but is eventually able to injure Eijiro after landing a few more explosions. Katsuki realizes that Eijiro's hardening weakens through continuous strikes and takes advantage of that by barraging him with a series of explosions. Eijiro's defense eventually gives way and he's knocked unconscious by Katsuki's final blast. In his semi-final matchup, Katsuki duels with Fumikage Tokoyami. He comments that Fumikage's dark shadow is annoying and continues to brutalize it using his explosions. Fumikage is forced completely on the defensive as Katsuki's attacks continue to get faster. Fumikage surrenders and Katsuki proceeds to the finals to face Shoto Todoroki. Katsuki accidentally barges into the wrong waiting room and finds Shoto there. He yells at Shoto for being in the waiting room until he realizes that he's actually entered the wrong room. Shoto doesn't pay Katsuki any mind, much to his irritation. He uses a small explosion to try and intimidate Shoto, saying that he better bring his best to their upcoming bout. Shoto replies that Izuku told him the same thing, and then asks if he was so helpful during their childhood. This greatly annoys Katsuki, who kicks over the table and yells for Shoto to ignore Izuku and his family issues so that he can use his fire during their battle. Katsuki angrily exits the room and states he wants everyone to know he can beat Shoto at full strength. The UA Sports Festival's finale between Katsuki and Shoto begins soon after. Shoto opens the fight with a large-scale ice attack. At first, it appears that Katsuki is frozen inside the icy prison, but he endures it by blasting through the ice with his explosions. After freeing himself from the frozen prison, Katsuki says Shoto has powerful attacks, but he also has bad aim and needs to try harder. He rushes Shoto, who attempts to touch him with his right side, but Katsuki uses a small explosion in midair to avoid being frozen. Katsuki grabs onto Shoto's left side and throws him away. Shoto recovers by creating a wave of ice that he surfs and sends towards his opponent. Katsuki tries to blast Shoto, but he avoids and grabs onto Katsuki's arm using his left hand. Instead of burning Katsuki, Shoto simply tosses him away. This annoys Katsuki, who questions if Shoto feels he's unworthy of his flames. He continues, threatening to kill Shoto, and berates him for not giving their match his best. Katsuki demands Shoto use his fire so that he can defeat him at his best, and prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is the strongest student at the festival. Shoto mulls over his words, until suddenly Izuku starts cheering for him from the crowd. Katsuki notices and comments that Izuku is a stupid nerd before propelling himself in the air. Encouraged by Izuku, Shoto ignites his flames, exciting Katsuki. To counter, Katsuki decides to use his special move, Howitzer Impact. He begins his attack by using small explosions to propel himself in the circular motion and create a twister that surrounds him. However, just as the two superpowers are about to clash, Shoto extinguishes his flames and exposes himself to Katsuki's large-scale explosion. When the smoke clears, Katsuki realizes Shoto didn't actually use his fire and has been blasted outside the ring. Unsatisfied, Katsuki runs over to Shoto even though he's unconscious and furiously demands that he get back up because a victory in this matter is meaningless to him. Midnight uses her quirk to knock Katsuki out and declares him the victor of the battle and first-year champion of the UA Sports Festival. When Katsuki awakens, he goes ballistic with fury, still angry with Shoto for basically throwing their match. He has to be restrained, muzzled, and chained to the champion's podium during the closing ceremony for the festival. All Might removes the restraint mask on his face before congratulating him on foreshadowing his victory during the opening ceremony. He notices Katsuki's face is scary thanks to his undeniable rage and tries to give him the gold medal. Katsuki refuses and tells All Might to get that garbage away from him because he still hasn't proved he's the best. All Might tries to encourage Katsuki to accept the medal, even if it's just as a scar. Katsuki still refuses, so All Might forces it in his mouth. After the sports festival concludes, Class 1A returns to their homeroom class where Aizawa grants them the next 2 days off. Katsuki is still visually upset with the way he's won. Katsuki remains fuming even until the next day, where he wakes up at noon and angrily brushes his teeth, yelling for his mouth germs to die as his mother shouts at him to stop being loud. Versus Hero Killer Arc. Katsuki returns to class 2 days after the sports festival. Aizawa teaches them about hero informatics and reveals the draft results prior to the festival. Katsuki received 3,556 offers from pro heroes, second highest in the class behind only Shoto. Denki comments that this is because pros may have been reluctant to send nominations to a student who needed to be chained up at the end of the festival. Katsuki angrily replies that if a pro was scared away, then they're just weak. Midnight joins the class to help them select hero names for their upcoming internships. Initially, Katsuki tries to choose King Explosion Murder, but Midnight says it's too violent. While Katsuki rewrites his codename, he notices Izuku chooses Deku as his moniker and is annoyed. Once everyone else is finished presenting, Katsuki changes his alias to Lord Explosion Murder, and Midnight comments that it's basically the same as before. At lunchtime, Katsuki finds himself irritated while listening to the class discuss Izuku's workout regimen. When first day of the internships arrive, Katsuki receives his costume and boards a train to Best Jeanist's agency. When Katsuki arrives at Best Jeanist's office in Tokyo, Best Jeanist admits that he isn't very fond of Katsuki because of his brutal and aggressive attitude, despite him being talented enough to take on as a sidekick. Katsuki's irritated by the number 4 hero's lecture and tries to approach him, forcing the pro to restrain him in threads using his quirk. Best Jeanist continues, stating that by the end of their time together, he will have transformed Katsuki into an exemplary hero. The next day, Best Jeanist scolds Katsuki on the importance of a hero maintaining an elegant appearance. He styles Katsuki's wild spiky hair into a neat side part similar to his own. While Best Jeanist's sidekicks believe that the intern's new hairstyle is an improvement, Katsuki starts to regret choosing the agency. After Stain's defeat is published, Best Jeanist explains that the Hosu incident is all over the news, but reminds Katsuki and his sidekicks that they must remain calm and collected. While Best Jeanist tells everyone that everything will run smoothly as normal, Katsuki, now wearing a pair of smart blue denim jeans in place of his usually baggy black pants, mulls over his poor choice of an internship. Sometime during the internship, Katsuki goes out on patrol with Best Jeanist. He tells Katsuki that patrolling helps to dissuade villains from committing crimes and asks the boy if he knows the other important reason for patrolling, to which he answers that if any villains do strike, they can find and beat them up faster and more easily. Best Jeanist says this answer is wrong and corrects him, telling him that the patrols are to show the public who heroes are and give them peace of mind. To emphasize his point, he waves at a group of schoolgirls who recognized him and started to swoon over the number 4 hero. Then a few small children recognize Katsuki from what he believes to be the sports festival. However, they actually recall him from the sludge villain incident. This angers Katsuki, who yells at the kids and makes them cry. Best Jeanist asks Katsuki to deal with them properly, but Katsuki ends up intimidating them further. The internship concludes at the end of the week and Katsuki returns to UA. His first day back, he's immediately met by Eiichiro and Hanta hysterically laughing and making fun of his new haircut. Embarrassed, Katsuki demands that they stop, telling them that his hair had gotten used to its new style and he couldn't get it to return to its previous style. Katsuki threatens them, but they just continue laughing, telling them that they'd like to see him try and calling them Pretty Boy. This nickname causes Katsuki to lash out at them in anger and his hair returns to normal. During basic hero training, Katsuki immediately declares Izuku will lose but watches the rescue training race and notices Izuku's new abilities are copies of his own movements. Katsuki is greatly shocked and irritated that Izuku improved a great deal while he was stuck wasting his time with Best Jeanist. Final Exams Arc. 1 week prior to final exams, Eiichiro notes that Momo is being virtuous in her studies and suggests that he may join her. Katsuki, who came in 3rd in midterm grades, angrily asks if Eiichiro wants to beat the lessons into his head, as Eiichiro states he's counting on it. After lunch, Katsuki overhears Denki and Mina talking about how the practical portion of the finals consists of fighting robotic villains. Katsuki believes they're far too excited and yells at them both, telling them he'd destroy whatever was in the way and they needed to learn to control their quirks as the scared duo note that he's right. Katsuki turns his attention to Izuku and states that the way the latter is using his quirk now is pissing him off. Ochako figures that Katsuki is referring to Izuku's movements during the rescue training race and how they matched Katsuki's own. Katsuki claims that he doesn't want an empty victory like the UA Sports Festival, and says that their personal grades in the upcoming finals will determine their status. Katsuki declares he'll be the best, as he threatens to defeat Shoto as well before he storms out of class. Eijiro notes that Katsuki hasn't been so tense in a while, and Fumikage replies that impatience and hatred have gotten the better of him. As Katsuki walks through the school corridors, Aizawa notes that Katsuki is getting worse. In the days leading up to the final exams, Katsuki helps Eijiro study. After completing the written portion of the exam, Katsuki and his class meet at the training grounds in their costumes for the practical portion. There, Class 1A meets with the teachers, and Principal Nezu explains that the practical has been changed from fighting robotic villains to being paired together and facing off with one of the teachers. Katsuki is shocked to find out that he and Izuku have been paired together against All Might in the 10th and final match. Principal Nezu goes on to explain that students can either escape or handcuff their teacher to pass the exam within 30 minutes. All Might adds that the teachers will wear high-density weights to give the students a handicap. Katsuki claims that the teachers are underestimating the students, but All Might replies that they will see during their battle. Aizawa dismisses the students, and Katsuki shuns Izuku to wait for their battle alone. When the time arrives for their match, Katsuki tries to ignore Izuku while walking through the replica city. Izuku pleads with Katsuki to consider escaping rather than fighting All Might. Katsuki refutes him and says that he will beat All Might himself. Izuku replies that it isn't possible, angering Katsuki enough for him to hit Izuku and demand he stop speaking. Izuku says he's trying to communicate so they can pass, but Katsuki replies that Izuku's power isn't needed in this battle. They begin yelling at each other but are interrupted when a shockwave sent by All Might decimates the city street. Katsuki notices All Might's malicious presence and notes how intimidating it is. Izuku wishes to run, but despite this, Katsuki decides to stand his ground. He uses Stun Grenade to blind All Might, but the hero resists and grabs Katsuki's face. Katsuki counterattacks with small consecutive explosions that don't appear to harm All Might, and he slams Katsuki into the ground. When he recovers, Katsuki tries to rush All Might but ends up crashing into a fleeing Izuku. After the recoil, Izuku tells Katsuki they need to retreat, and Katsuki replies that he will win because that's what heroes do. This prompts Izuku to remember their childhood and how Katsuki admired All Might as a hero because he always won in the end regardless of the situation. Izuku continues his pleas to no avail, and then suddenly All Might pins down Izuku using a guardrail before sending Katsuki flying with a punch powerful enough to make him vomit. All Might approaches Katsuki and says he understands Katsuki's anger is because of Izuku's sudden growth. He continues, saying that Katsuki is stifling his own potential, but Katsuki interrupts and says that if he has to work with Izuku, then he'd rather lose. Disappointed with his student's reply, All Might prepares to finish him off. Izuku swiftly comes to the rescue and punches Katsuki away, telling him not to say he'd rather lose. Izuku carries Katsuki away down an alleyway until Katsuki makes him stop. He tells Katsuki to at least try working together because saying he'd rather lose is against Katsuki's nature. Angered, Katsuki blasts the piece of wall next to Izuku's head and says that they can't avoid fighting All Might. Katsuki believes their only chance is to blast him at point-blank range with all the firepower they have. When All Might passes by their alleyway, Katsuki makes himself known and blasts All Might from behind, all while struggling to come to terms with his decision to work with Izuku. Once Katsuki gets All Might's attention, he calls for Izuku to appear behind the #1 hero, having given him a Grenadier Bracer beforehand. Izuku pulls the pin from the gauntlet and blasts All Might. He questions how Katsuki has been using such a powerful weapon, and Katsuki orders them to run from the escape gate together. While fleeing, Katsuki notices that All Might destroyed the entire area from their initial entrance to the escape gate earlier. Izuku comments that All Might isn't chasing them and perhaps got knocked out by the explosion. Katsuki tells him that he's an idiot for believing that and gets taken by surprise when All Might suddenly catches up to them with his blistering speed and breaks both of the Grenadier Bracers. All Might knees Katsuki into a building and grabs Izuku. Katsuki quickly recovers and rushes All Might again, only for him to slam Izuku into him and subsequently pin them both down. While immobilized, Katsuki mulls over All Might's overwhelming power and admits he's the world's greatest hero. All Might dissects their earlier plan and states that the fight is over because he's destroyed the Grenadier Bracers. Katsuki demands he stop talking and blasts All Might with a super explosion similar to the one he used against Ochako in their sports festival fight. Then he grabs Izuku and warns him he's going flying. He throws Izuku towards the escape gate only for All Might to smash him into a nearby bus. Katsuki rushes over to distract All Might and admits to himself that it was foolish to believe he could best All Might without taking any risks, and uses a second super explosion against him. Izuku moves slowly towards the gate, and Katsuki yells for him to hurry. Katsuki continues to blast All Might with super explosion so that Izuku can make for the escape point, which would force All Might to stop him. All Might does just that, giving Katsuki the opening they were looking for. However, All Might avoids Katsuki's attack and slams him into the ground. Falling out of consciousness, Katsuki bites All Might's hand and says he refuses to believe that he can't win even if he's up against All Might. Surprisingly, Izuku doesn't escape. Instead, he rushes back to help Katsuki. Izuku smiles and punches All Might in the face, asking his mentor to move aside. While All Might is suffering from slight recoil, Izuku grabs Katsuki's unconscious body and gets through the escape gate. Katsuki and Izuku pass the exam and are taken to Recovery Girl's office to receive treatment. Once final exams conclude, Katsuki learns that he passed both portions of the final exams and will attend training camp during the summer. After class, Katsuki's peers decide to go shopping to buy what they need for the camp. Eishido asks Katsuki to join them, but he refuses. My Hero Academia 2 Heroes. Because he won the UA Sports Festival, Katsuki was invited to Ai Island and was accompanied by Eishido. On Ai Island, Katsuki and Eishido participated in the villain attraction, in which the former reached first place at 15 seconds. However, Katsuki notices Izuku and several of his classmates watching from the stands, and, naturally irritated, blasts himself over to Izuku and yells, making a scene. Izuku himself then participates in the game, scoring second place at 16 seconds, annoying Katsuki as his classmates praise Izuku's skills. He's further pissed off when he sees that Shoto took his spot at 14 seconds and angrily interrogates him. Katsuki is invited to attend the reception party at 6:30 p.m., but because they left their cell phones, the two got lost and wandered inside the central tower, unaware that Wolfram and his crew of villains have taken over Ai Island. While walking around the plant factory, Katsuki and Eishido are confronted by two of Wolfram's minions, Nobu and Daigo. Eishido tries to explain that they're lost, only to be attacked. Shoto, who is nearby with the rest of his classmates, saves the two with ice and explains the situation to them before engaging in combat. Katsuki defeats Daigo with his howitzer impact and gets some of his sweat on Nobu, which Shoto ignites with his fire, defeating the villains. Katsuki checks up on Eishido and thanks him for saving his life, only to be interrupted by a mass of security bots. They make their way to the top, and Katsuki saves Ochako from the security bots, and so they continue repelling the bots before. The wind threatens to throw the floating Izuku and Melissa shield off course, but Katsuki moves one of the turbines and Shoto uses his flames to push hot wind in their direction, correcting their course. At the top of the central tower, Katsuki and Shoto arrive in time to save All Might, with the rest of their classmates arriving to help. Impassioned by everyone's willingness to help, All Might breaks free and goes to defeat Wolfram. Shoto and Katsuki smile in celebration, but the latter turns away and frowns in embarrassment as Shoto noticed. Forest Training Camp Arc. A day prior to summer break, Izuku invites Shoto and the other boys from Class 1A to the pool for endurance training. They hold competitive swimming races, and Katsuki wins his leg by flying over the pool instead of actually swimming. Just before Katsuki, Izuku, and Shoto compete in the final race, Shota Aizawa arrives and tells them they're out of time to use the pool and kicks them out. Summer break begins, and Class 1A rides a bus to a forest reserve belonging to the hero team, the Wild Wild Pussycats. Pixie Bob and Mandalay introduce themselves and challenge the students to reach base camp past the forest in 3 hours. When mostly everyone refuses, they're forcibly thrown into Beast Forest by Pixie Bob's Quirk. A monster created from dirt clods immediately attacks Minoru. Katsuki works together with Izuku, Shoto, and Tenya to defeat it. Class 1A works together to fight their way through Beast's Forest. They encounter several dirt monsters. Katsuki and Shoto take one out together, much to Katsuki's displeasure. Class 1A doesn't arrive at base camp for several more hours. Well over their time limit, Class 1A arrives at the base camp exhausted and battered. Mandalay reveals the time limit was the expectancy for actual heroes, not the students. Mandalay's nephew Kota punches Izuku in his groin. Katsuki says that the boy is precious, and Shoto compares the two to each other. This angers Katsuki, and he threatens Shoto until Shota breaks it up. The Pussycats serve the students dinner, and the boys bathe in the hot springs afterward. Training begins the next day. Shota makes an example out of Katsuki by having him throw the ball like he did during the fitness tests. Katsuki expects to toss the ball over a kilometer, but only throws it 4 meters farther. Shota explains that while the students have gotten stronger, their quirks haven't. Katsuki trains by soaking his hands in boiling water to open his sweat glands and then creating a large explosion repeatedly. On the evening of the 3rd day, Katsuki ends up paired with Shoto for the test of courage. He tries to make Mashirao switch partners with him, but Mashirao refuses. Class 1A students roam the forest while Class 1B students try to scare them. The duo is slightly shaken by a Yui Kodai and Ragdoll. Suddenly, the League of Villains Vanguard Action Squad unexpectedly attacks the training camp during the night. Shoto, who's carrying an injured Kosei Suburaba, and Katsuki walk through the forest while trying to avoid the poisonous gas. Mandalay sends out a message using her telepathy quirk, telling the students not to engage the invading villains. On their way, they encounter the villain Moonfish. Katsuki asks Shoto which group was ahead of them, to which Shoto answers Fumikage and Mezzo. The villain admires a severed arm on the ground and turns his attention to the duo before warning them not to distract him from the flesh. Mandalay sends another telepathic message to all the students, giving them permission to engage in combat. She also informs everyone that Katsuki is one of the villain's targets. Katsuki ignores Mandalay's warnings and rushes to attack Moonfish. Moonfish nearly stabs Katsuki with his quirk-enhanced teeth blades, which is freaking gross if you ask me, but Shoto blocks it with his ice. Shoto warns Katsuki not to attack carelessly. Irritated, Katsuki mentions that he gets the feeling Izuku is involved in Mandalay's sudden change of heart. Moonfish nearly stabs Katsuki again, but he evades. Shoto repels him using ice, and the villain moves through the treetops using his quirk. Shoto sternly tells Katsuki not to start fires because they could ignite the forest and kill their own classmates. Moonfish continues his assault on the tandem from the sky. Frustrated with his inability to fight back, Katsuki threatens to blast the villain without restraint. Their battle is interrupted when a berserk dark shadow rampages through the forest chasing after Mezzo, who's carrying an injured Izuku on his back. Mezzo desperately pleads for one of them to provide light to tame Dark Shadow. Shoto prepares to use his fire, but Katsuki tells him to wait. Moonfish attacks Dark Shadow and is ultimately crushed as a result. Katsuki advises Shoto to wait until Dark Shadow finishes the job and it defeats Moonfish. Immediately following the criminal's demise, Katsuki and Shoto create light with their quirks to return Dark Shadow to its weaker form. Katsuki reminds Fumikage that his quirk is a bad matchup for Dark Shadow. Fumikage thanks the boys for saving him, and then the group decides their next priority is to escort Katsuki back to camp. Katsuki watches in confusion as the group devises a plan to protect him. When they decide on their strategy, Katsuki yells at them and tells them that he doesn't need protection. The Bakugo escort team eventually reaches Ochako and Tsuyu fighting off Himiko Toga. Izuku recruits them to their mission. The girls question why Katsuki isn't present, forcing the team to realize that Katsuki and Fumikage are missing. Mr. Compress makes his presence known and explains that he took Katsuki with his magic because he'll shine brighter on the villain's side. Izuki, Katsuki, Shoto, Ochako, and Tsuyu chase Mr. Compress until the boys are able to tackle him out of the air. They stop him at the villain's rendezvous point, and the battle ensues to decide the fate of Katsuki and Fumikage. The team is able to rescue Fumikage, but Katsuki is ultimately captured by the Vanguard Action Squad. As his body is reverted from Mr. Compress's quirk, Katsuki is dragged by his neck by Dabi into Kurogiri's portal. Izuku cries out for Katsuki, only for the latter to nervously reply for Izuku to stay back. Hideout Raid Arc. The League of Villains kidnap Katsuki and restrain him to a chair. He's surrounded by villains and hidden inside their secret bar. They all listen to a broadcast berating UA for allowing one of their students to fall into the hands of the villains. Tomura Shigaraki explains that Hero Society has been shattered and the villains have gained a victory over pro-heroes. Tomura suggests that Katsuki join them since he's known for winning. Tomura asks Dabi to release Katsuki's restraints. Dabi refuses because he knows Katsuki will fight back. He makes Twice do it instead. Mr. Compress apologizes for kidnapping Katsuki in such a violent manner and assures him that the League of Villains is an organized group. Katsuki is relieved of his restraints and he immediately knocks Twice over and blasts Tomura's mask off with an explosion to the face. Katsuki complains about the villains' endless talking and surmises that they just want him to join so they can start trouble. He emphatically states that he loves to win, but he'll only win as a hero like All Might, and the villains will never change that. Katsuki knows his value to the League and believes he can take some of them out before he escapes. Magne mentions that Katsuki's clever, but Mr. Compress argues he should have pretended to be on the villain's side. Katsuki replies that he'll never fake anything he does. Tomura Shigaraki recovers and orders his allies to stand down. Tomura puts his mask on and expresses his disapproval of Katsuki's refusal. With no other choice, Tomura asks his master to lend him his power. Katsuki is surprised to learn that Tomura isn't the actual leader and taunts him for it. Tomura orders Mr. Compress and Kurogiri to restrain Katsuki again, and the young student worries that Kurogiri is too fast for him to fight. Their confrontation is interrupted by a sudden knock at the door from Kamino's pizza delivery. While everyone's focused on the mysterious knock, All Might breaks in the opposite wall of the hideout behind the villains to take them by surprise. Kamui Woods quickly restrains everyone except Katsuki. All Might apologizes to Katsuki, who refuses to admit he was ever scared. Before All Might can finish interrogating the villains, a mysterious black liquid transports Nomu into the hideout. They distract the heroes while the black liquid spills from Katsuki's mouth and warps him away before All Might can save him. Katsuki is transported to the Nomu factory by All for One. All for One helps Tomura start his scheme over again because he deemed Katsuki an important piece of the plan. All Might swiftly catches up to the villains and confronts All for One alone. Katsuki is shocked the boss villain is able to hold All Might back with his bare hands. All for One repels All Might with a powerful air cannon, and Katsuki yells out in disbelief. All for One assures him All Might will return and orders his subordinates to capture Katsuki and retreat. The villains surround Katsuki, and the young man knows he has to fight to survive. Katsuki fights the villains 6-on-1, using his explosions to evade their attacks and keep them at bay. He knows the villains are trying to drag him away by force this time, and he cannot let Mr. Compress lay a finger on him. Izuku, Tenya, and Eijiro suddenly launch themselves into the air above the battlefield. Eijiro calls out to Katsuki, telling him to come and escape with them. Katsuki listens to his closest friend and uses a giant explosion to propel himself high into the air. He uses a second explosion to soar through the sky and catches up with his fellow students, calling them idiots after grabbing Eijiro's hands. The world watches the epic clash between light and darkness on a public screen. All for One manages to injure All Might and reveals his weak form to the world. Katsuki stares in shock. As All Might stands silently near defeat, Katsuki becomes nervous. He and Izuku both yell out for their favorite hero to fight back and win. All Might defeats All for One in epic fashion, putting Katsuki's mind at ease. After his victory, All Might delivers an inspiring message saying, "You're next." Everyone believes All Might is referring to putting a stop to the other villains, but Izuku starts crying dramatically. Katsuki notices the strong difference between Izuku's reaction compared to everyone else. Katsuki's classmates take him to the police station and he's returned home. After the events of his kidnapping and the fight in Kamino, U.A. decides to transform into a boarding school. All Might and Aizawa visit the Bakugo household to get Katsuki's parents' permission. His mother Mitsuki immediately agrees to the plan and slaps Katsuki across the head for being weak. He yells at her not to hit him, but she does it again and yells back. Katsuki's father tells them to stop arguing in front of the teachers, but Katsuki tells him to stay out of it. All Might and Aizawa ask again if Katsuki's parents are sure about moving Katsuki into a dorm. Mitsuki claims she's grateful for it because she was relieved to hear Aizawa claim the villains would have no sway on Katsuki at the press conference following the kidnappings. She goes further of how she's happy that they see him for who he is and don't pride him like others did, which is what caused his personality to begin with. She knows UA will face harsh criticism, but claims the Bakugo family will entrust Katsuki to them as they're forever thankful for what they've done. Afterward, Katsuki follows All Might outside and asks what Deku is to him. All Might claims he's a student, just like Katsuki is. Katsuki's disappointed with the answer, and Mitsuki tells him not to go outside, and Katsuki returns to his home. Provisional Hero License Exam Arc. Class 1A moves into Heights Alliance following UA's conversion to a boarding school. Shota Aizawa introduces his class to their new homes, but first, he confronts them about Katsuki's rescue. He claims everyone but Katsuki, Kyoka, and Toru would have been expelled if it weren't for All Might's retirement. The mood over the class becomes gloomy. Katsuki raises everyone's spirits by forcing Denki into his stupid state. Then he repays Eijiro for the night vision goggles he bought for the rescue mission. Everyone moves into their new dorms, and the girls try to host a Room King contest. Katsuki thinks it's stupid and goes to bed instead. Class 1A begins training for the Provisional Hero License exam the next day. Ectoplasm, Midnight, and Cementos bring the class to Gym Gamma to develop a set of super moves for the exam. Katsuki trains to develop his quirk by using his explosions to spar with an ectoplasm clone. He's able to destroy one with a large-scale explosion and expresses his joy about being able to let loose again. He demands Ectoplasm give him another clone to fight and continues training. All Might and Aizawa watch and agree that Katsuki will continue to grow stronger. A few days later, Katsuki develops a new super move. He focuses his explosion into a single point and then fires it off as a concentrated blast. Katsuki develops a P-shot, armor-piercing shot, and uses it to pierce a solid slab of stone. A piece of the stone falls close to All Might and Katsuki warns him. Izuku suddenly swoops in and kicks the stone into pieces, surprising Katsuki and everyone watching. Irritated, Katsuki tells All Might to watch himself and storms off with an explosion. The day of the licensing exam arrives, and Class 1A travels to National Dagobah Arena. Everyone enters the stadium, and Yokumiro Mera explains the purpose and rules of the licensing exam to over 1,000 participants from various schools. Only 1% of students can pass the first phase of the exam. Students must use orange balls to tag the 3 weak points that everyone must place on their bodies. The first 100 students to eliminate 2 people will advance. Katsuki takes his 3 targets and puts them in plain view across his waist. The first phase begins and Izuku suggests that Class 1A stick together, but Katsuki refuses and goes off on his own. Eijiro and Denki follow Katsuki to a street-side area of the arena. Katsuki yells at them both to stop talking, and Eijiro replies telling Katsuki to relax. A mound of flesh is thrown at Katsuki, and Eijiro throws himself in the way to save his friend. The flesh attack transforms Eijiro into a meatball that lands in Seiji Shishikura's hand. Seiji starts monologuing about Class 1A's vulgarity compared to their Shiketsu rivals. Katsuki mentions that he hates Seiji's type, but Denki is intimidated. He even taunts Seiji's eyes, and Denki pleads with Katsuki to stop provoking him. Seiji activates his quirk and claims that Katsuki acts in ways that disgrace heroes. Katsuki refutes Seiji's claims and tells him to speak with actions instead of words. Seiji attacks with flesh bullets, and Katsuki counters with his AP shot. With his AP shot, autocannon super move. The violent UA student claims he made a weaker version of his super move so he doesn't kill anyone. Seiji prepares his next attack and claims he'll break Katsuki's pride so he'll become dignified. Katsuki rushes Seiji and says he'll shut up once he's blown to pieces. Denki reminds Katsuki that they're in the middle of the test, and the latter replies that's why he has to kill his Shiketsu opponent. Denki tries to intervene but ends up missing his target. Seiji taunts him and Katsuki interrupts with an armor-piercing shot. Seiji manages to block the attack and sneaks a piece of flesh onto Katsuki's neck. Before Katsuki's kneaded into a meatball, he throws one of his grenades to Denki. Denki uses the grenade during his fight with Seiji. Denki manages to injure Seiji and he loses his hold on the meatballs. Katsuki and Eishido return to normal and both deliver the finishing blow. Katsuki berates Denki for taking so long and upsets him. Seiji's other victims return to normal as well. Excited, Katsuki licks his lips and announces they have targets. Katsuki, Denki, and Eishido manage to eliminate 2 people each and pass the test. They go towards the anteroom and happen upon Izuku, Ochako, and Hanta on their way. Katsuki says he isn't surprised that Izuku passed and says he's made his borrowed quirk his own. This shocks Izuku as Katsuki walks by him straight into the waiting room. All of Class 1A manages to pass the first test and the arena is transformed into a disaster zone. The second phase of the exam begins and Katsuki rushes off on his own again. Once again, Eishido and Denki follow him through the arena. They arrive at the mountain area and there are 2 HUC people asking for help. Katsuki yells at them and orders them to save themselves. Katsuki refuses to help other people that Denki and Eishido decide to rescue. The exam ends after Denki and Eishido save the last 2 people from HUC. Everyone meets to look over a presentation board revealing who passed the exam. Katsuki is livid to find out that he failed the exam. Yokumito Mera eventually addresses those who failed, which includes Shoto and Inasa as well. Yokumito reveals that there's a 3-month special training course that students can pass to obtain their provisional licenses. Katsuki, Shoto, and Inasa all decide they'll participate rather than taking the test again. That evening, Class 1A talks about classes starting up again. Katsuki walks past Izuku and tells him to come outside to have a talk about his quirk. Katsuki reminds Deku that he's always gotten under his skin. Deku used to be a nobody, and now Katsuki wants to know how he got into middle school with a quirk that appeared out of nowhere. Ever since All Might arrived at UA, Izuku has gotten stronger until finally, he passed the licensing exam while Katsuki failed. Katsuki asks Izuku if he got his quirk from All Might. He knows that All For One has the ability to take people's quirks because he stole ragdolls. Izuku met All Might and started growing while All Might lost his power and had to retire. Katsuki brings up the last thing All Might said after beating All For One. He realizes now that Izuku was the only one who knew what All Might actually meant by "you're next." More evidence includes the Nomu's multiple quirks and the relationship between All Might and All For One. Katsuki tried asking All Might before but didn't get an answer, so now he asks Izuku for the truth. When seeing Izuku doesn't deny anything, Katsuki figures he's correct. Izuku asks what's next, and Katsuki tells him that because Katsuki's idol chose Izuku, they must fight to settle things once and for all. Izuku doesn't want to fight and tells Katsuki they can spar in a training room instead. Katsuki reminds Izuku that they won't be able to go all out. He wants to see why All Might chose a person like Izuku to inherit his power. Katsuki wants to know if Izuku's admiration was for better reasons than Katsuki's, and if everything he's done to be like him is wrong. He starts stretching and Izuku tries to talk him out of fighting. Kacchan attacks Izuku and nearly blows him up with a right hook. He tells Izuku that he's always overthinking things and to just fight. Izuku wants to talk things out, but Katsuki is infuriated by memories of Izuku constantly following him throughout their lives. He attacks until Izuku is forced to defend himself and kicks Kacchan back. Both of them go all out and clash their quirks at full power. Katsuki flips himself on top of Deku and uses a large explosion to crash them both into the ground. When the smoke clears, Katsuki pins down his rival and claims victory. A distraught Katsuki is not comforted. He wants to know how Izuku could lose a fight with All Might's power. All Might suddenly appears and breaks up the fight, revealing he was watching it happen. Katsuki asks why All Might chose Izuku after the sludge villain incident. All Might explains that Izuku's heroism is what garnered him a chance to compete with strong people like Katsuki. Katsuki replies that he's weak too, and that it's his fault All Might lost his power. All Might embraces Katsuki and tells him that One For All was always going to fade regardless of what happened. All Might apologizes for focusing too much on Katsuki's physical strength. All Might tells the boys that needing to be the best and wanting to save others are both key to becoming a great pro hero. He advises them to learn from each other and grow into heroes that can win by saving people and save people to win. Katsuki knows All Might is right and tells Izuku not to lose anymore with All Might's power. Katsuki asks who knows about All Might and Izuku, and the former says out of the students, only Katsuki knows the truth. Katsuki promises to keep it a secret, and the two heroes thank him. Katsuki claims that it would just be a pain if the truth got out. Katsuki tells Izuku that he's going to absorb knowledge from his classmates and surpass even the Chosen One. Izuku claims that he'll climb even higher, and this irritates Katsuki. They start arguing about surpassing each other, and All Might recognizes that they've evolved into proper rivals now. When they return to Heights Alliance, Aizawa restrains them both with his scarf and scolds them for fighting. All Might tries to get his colleague to calm down, but he still issues 4 days house arrest to Katsuki and 3 to Izuku. They must clean all the rooms and write a written apology on the last day of their punishments. The next morning, Katsuki's classmates berate the duo for fighting. Already irritated, Katsuki gets even more annoyed when Shoto inquires about their extra classes. After everyone else leaves, Izuku asks Katsuki what he thinks about shoot style. After a small pause, Katsuki calmly tells Izuku that his movements are too obvious, and even when he got faster, his attacks were readable. He also adds that Izuku's punch irritated him. This is the first time that Katsuki and Izuku have a normal conversation with each other. Shie Hassaikai Arc. After his recent fight with Izuku, Katsuki still spends 1 more day of his house arrest. However, Katsuki eventually returns to his class and resumes his daily lessons. For the following days, Katsuki and Shoto both go out of their dorms to retake the hero license exam, with Shoto constantly reminding the former to catch up with their other classmates. Remedial Course Arc. The next day, Katsuki and Shoto retake the hero license exam with Inasa and Keimi Itsushimi. While there, they have to reach out to a group of unruly children with their hearts. Katsuki accurately deduces that there's a leader among the children who sets the mood for them to be rebellious. During all of this, Katsuki meets a young boy who has a similar attitude towards everything. Katsuki then advises him to not look down on others, because then he would never acknowledge his own weaknesses. Katsuki ends up passing his exam alongside the others. Eijiro requests for Katsuki to train with him since he wants to test his limits. He then takes Eijiro upon his request. Joint Training Arc. Katsuki spots Izuku speaking to All Might and decides to get answers. He surprises the pair and tells them that their secret talks would get them caught, and asks about Izuku's quirk and discovers it activated on its own. He questions if Izuku has truly made it his own since he intends to prove himself stronger than him before getting annoyed by Izuku smiling at his challenge. Before the battle, Katsuki and his team discuss their strategy for the 4th round of the joint training battle. Katsuki wanted to take the lead and charge ahead with the others serving as backup. He tells Kyoka to pick up on sounds coming from Class 1B and to figure out their location. When Hanta spoke up against this, Katsuki mocked him and says that if they don't make the first move, it's over for them. He says that they don't have time to take caution, they have to act immediately. Leading his team, Katsuki has them keep up and orders Kyoka to forget about listening to the sounds, to their annoyance of his behavior. While surveying on his own, Katsuki believed he spotted Class 1B and had Kyoka use her quirk. She proceeds to do so and says that all the Class 1B team members should be nearby and to go find them. Upon further use of her quirk, she yells to her teammates that it's a trap. Setsuna appears behind Katsuki and says that this time is up, and proceeds to attack him with her quirk. It's revealed that Setsuna's quirk is Lizard Tail Splitter. With her quirk, she's able to split her body into several pieces and move them. At that moment, she's able to divide her body up to 50 different parts depending on the length. Katsuki gets bombarded by Setsuna's quirk, and notes that while their strength doesn't amount to much, they annoy him because they're too small of targets. Soon, Katsuki evaded her and arrived to help his teammates. The explosive hero stops Rikido from sacrificing himself by destroying the glue-covered pipes and barricade with his explosion while still being relentlessly assaulted by Setsuna's lizard parts. With the barricade gone, Togaru dives towards the Class 1A team to attack them, with Setsuna telling him to take care of Kyoka first, since she's the most troublesome. As Togaru is about to land a fatal blow on her, Katsuki intercepts him and hits him with a powerful explosion at point-blank range. Blasting Togaru away, Katsuki takes command again by declaring to his team that they're going to score a perfect victory by ending the match in a 4-0, with everyone unscathed. After being told that Kyoka is receiving interference, Katsuki blasts forward at full speed. However, this allows Yosetsu to reveal himself and detain Katsuki with his newly developed super move, High-Speed Construction, Weldcraft. Struggling to break out of Yosetsu's trap, Katsuki witnesses Rikido arrive to free him with his Sugar Rush power-up. Now released, Katsuki proceeds to chase after Yosetsu, who then tries to protect himself by attaching multiple steel plates to his body. It's revealed Katsuki deceived him by blasting upwards, only for Hanta and Kyoka to stun Yosetsu with a combined attack. Pleased by this, Katsuki shows confidence in his allies, while his comrades are revealed to have successfully restrained their opponents. An explosive victory. Directed by Kyoka, Katsuki heads towards the remaining members of 1B. After locating Togaru, Katsuki engages in combat with him before he manages to defeat Togaru with a fiery super move, while a recovering Setsuna notices one of Katsuki's grenades attached to a spare part. This gives Class 1A an advantage as they notice an explosion from a not so far distance. Just as Setsuna believes that she avoided getting caught, Katsuki catches her off guard by firing off point-blank stun grenade directly at her body. Setsuna commends Katsuki for how much he changed as she gets caught in the explosion. The explosive hero replies back that he hasn't changed at all, as he still retains his main goal of becoming the #1 hero that surpasses All Might. Returning to the rest of his class, Katsuki is shocked by Izuku using a new quirk. After the training, he, Izuku, and All Might gathered in the lounge to discuss Izuku's sudden quirk and the one-for-all predecessor who possessed it. Katsuki asks All Might how he knew about the black tendrils, but All Might admits that he too was in the dark about it until Izuku filled him in. All Might wonders about this bald predecessor and the fact that one-for-all is capable of letting Izuku use previous wielders' quirks, saying that his master, Naneshimura, probably didn't know that this was a possibility either. Katsuki asks Izuku if there was a trigger that caused Black Whip to manifest, but the latter denies this, explaining that he was only told that the time has come, and wondering if there could have been some form of external catalyst. Katsuki then asks if this turn of events has anything to do with All for One, explaining that it would make sense as he was the person who created One for All in the first place, and he could also possess multiple quirks. To test Izuku's activation, All Might has Katsuki and Izuku engage in a sparring match at Gym Gamma. During the match, Katsuki questions Izuku on why he hasn't activated his Black Whip ability, in which the latter reveals that it apparently can't be unlocked as of now. All Might immediately halts the match for the sake of discussing more of Izuku's current development. Katsuki points out that Izuku's black tendrils only appear whenever he's put into mortal danger. At the dorms of UA, he's present when Class 1B comes to socialize with Class 1A and overhears Shoto question Izuku on his second quirk. He notes on Shoto's oblivious nature to Izuku's quirk. Metal Liberation Army Arc. During the early morning of December, Katsuki and Shoto left for the final lesson of the Provisional license course. He's seen eager to obtain his license when Gang Orca and his sidekicks prepare to carry out the final lesson for those present, stating that if they succeed, they'll obtain their licenses. While out on the streets with All Might, chaos breaks out in the city because of villains stealing from the public. Katsuki and Shoto were eager to intervene while All Might tells them to analyze the situation before leaping into action. The students tell him that they can handle it. All Might tries to dissuade them since they've only just earned the provisional licenses, but they pay no heed and attack the villains nonetheless, making use of their new privileges. Shoto creates an ice wall to stop the villains, but their leader breaks through the ice with his carbonation control quirk and calls for his gang to run away. Katsuki swiftly knocks out several villains without damaging the stolen items. However, the villain leader fends Katsuki off using high-powered jets of carbonated liquid from his gauntlets. Katsuki blasts away Light Pole and prevents it from hitting a careless bystander and All Might, and angrily reprimands the former. Shoto uses his flash freeze heat wave technique and knocks out the leader, angering Katsuki as that was the same move he used on Izuku during the sports festival. Katsuki confirms that none of the stolen belongings were damaged and that no bystanders were hurt. All Might, accompanied by Slide and Go, praise the boys' actions, and they notice that the villain's gauntlets have exploded and disintegrated. Slide and Go notes that it's expected from inferior black market products. My Hero Academia: Heroes Rising. Class 1A is sent to Napu Island, a remote place in southern Japan. The pro-heroes who protected the island are about to retire, so the students will take care of the place, performing duties as real heroes, acting like their own hero office, until the arrival of new pro-heroes. Because Nabu Island is quite isolated from the rest of the country, and therefore far from any villain activity, there's been no notable incident since the last 30 years. For this reason, their work on the island basically involves mostly minor deeds. Because of this, Katsuki hasn't done any work upon arriving on the island and chooses to stay at UA Agency, waiting for an actual villain to show up. One day, Katsuki sees Izuku training while coming back from his patrol, and tells him to hurry up and master his quirk. They have an exchange over who will be the #1 hero before it's interrupted by Katsuma Shimano. The young boy tells them a villain has appeared. Katsuki rushes over to where Katsuma said the villain's located. Katsuki arrives on the scene first to confront the villain, a giant praying mantis wreaking havoc on the side of a hill. Katsuki used his stun grenade to blind it, but he notices something wrong and stops attacking. Izuku arrives shortly afterward and sees the praying mantis attacking Katsuki, but it phases through him. Katsuki generates a huge explosion that makes Mahoro Shimano fall from her hiding place. The giant mantis disappears, confirming Katsuki's suspicions that the monster was fake because there was no shadow beneath it. The creature was created by Mahoro's quirk hologram. In infuriated Katsuki shouts to the girl if she's mocking him, and says that he's aiming to be the next #1 hero so he doesn't have time for pranks. Izuku restrains Katsuki out of fear that he may hurt the kids, and Mahoto and Katsuma scurry out of there while Katsuki struggles to get Izuku off him. The next morning, Katsuki overhears Katsuma apologizing to Izuku and learns that Mahoto thinks the hero work is dangerous, so she wants to discourage him from becoming one. He also listens to how Mahoto and Katsuma's mother passed away when they were young, and that their father is always working, which is why Mahoto is overprotective of her brother. Later in the day, Katsuki picked up the phone in Class 1A's hero office and hears Mahoto trying to warn them that villains have arrived. Katsuki doesn't believe her and tries to hang up, but Izuku takes the phone to listen, only for the phone service to be cut off. After word spreads that villains have indeed invaded Nabu Island, Katsuki notices a beacon in the form of an illusion of Izuku created by Mahoto and engages combat with 9. He finds out about 9's multiple quirks, comparing him to All For One. With this in mind, Katsuki outsmarts the villain and tries to attack up close, but is caught by surprise and pinned down by 9's Hydra quirk. 9 goes after Katsuma and Mahoto, but then suffers from his cell degeneration disease and is unable to continue fighting. Benzo, Ochako, and Tsuyu take the wounded Izuku and Katsuki and the children to safety. While they're unconscious, Katsuki and Izuku were being unsuccessfully healed by the doctors before Katsuma joins in and accelerates their healing using his cell activation quirk. After regaining consciousness, Katsuki and Izuku join their class, surprising them. Izuku tells Katsuma that he has an amazing quirk and shouldn't give it up to the villains, while Katsuki tells the class that all they have to do is crush the villains. Inspired by their words, Class 1A unanimously agreed to fight to protect the island. After devising a plan, Class 1A await the villain on Mount Shiroyama the next morning, with Katsuki insisting that they'll definitely win. As 9 defeats several students on his way to Katsuma, Katsuki and Izuku intercept the villain and fight him in a way that would make him overuse his quirks, weakening him. During a barrage of Delaware Smash Air Force and AP shots, Katsuki catches Izuku midair and launches him back at 9 with an Explodapult. Katsuki and Izuku have a hard time fighting against 9's air wall and bullet laser quirks and are knocked into a wall, but seemingly find an opening when he starts stumbling, indicating his disease taking effect. However, 9 takes a heavy dose of an empowering drug and summons a massive lightning strike, seemingly vaporizing Izuku and Katsuki. Unbeknownst to the villain, Denki Kaminari acted as a lightning rod and absorbed the lightning, so the two survived. Izuku and Katsuki arrive just in time to save Katsuma and Mahoto from 9 and overwhelm him with a combination of attacks. On the verge of defeat, 9 uses up the last of the drugs in his life support system and summons a massive fire tornado and lightning storm with his enhanced weather manipulation quirk. Izuku boosts his quirk to reach 100% and uses his Detroit Smash, while Katsuki uses his Howitzer Impact, but the two aren't strong enough to stop 9. 9 severely wounds Izuku and Katsuki and begins to crush them with his Hydra quirk. As an act of desperation, Izuku makes a daring gamble and transfers One For All to Katsuki. By doing so, the both of them are able to break away from 9's grip. Katsuki asks if Izuku's okay with letting his dream go like this, and he responds that there's no other way to save and win. The infuriated 9 attempts to kill them by summoning a massive storm, but the two heroes stop the tornado by using Detroit Smash at 100%. 9 is astonished, but refuses to give up and engages in intense battle with Katsuki and Izuku. Katsuki uses Explosion in conjunction with One For All to weaken 9, and after a lengthy battle, defeat 9 using Explosion and a St. Louis Smash. Both of them pass out, and the last embers of One For All are extinguished in Izuku. However, One For All still retained itself inside Izuku. Upon waking up, Katsuki gets amnesia and doesn't remember using One For All, and is angrily confused at why his arms are busted up. He's healed by Recovery Girl and stays with his class for several weeks to repair the damage done on the island until the Public Safety Commission suspends the program and orders them to be sent home. With the island being repaired by the military and the heroes, Class 1A boards a ferry to leave. As they leave, they see Katsuma and Mahoto, who reunite with their father, saying their goodbyes to Class 1A. Katsuki hears Katsuma's promise that he'll get stronger, and Izuku telling him that he'll be waiting for him at UA High School. Endeavor Agency Arc. At Class 1A dorms, both Katsuki and Shoto Todoroki are interviewed for their outstanding hero behavior during the time when they both took out the wannabe villains. Katsuki is particularly irritated when a reporter asks if Katsuki and Shoto are good friends, and when Shoto casually confirms it. Afterwards, Katsuki appears irritated that the interview staff had cut him out of the interview. Some of his classmates laugh off at the interview, only showing Shoto's face instead of Katsuki's. His classmates remark on the no surprise with his behavior. At the dorms, Katsuki and the rest of Class 1A celebrate Christmas with a party before they go over the topic of the impending work study. Katsuki is asked by Eijiro if he's heading back to Best Jeanist, to which he replies that he still doesn't know, while remembering the news about Jeanist's disappearance. Katsuki soon remembers when he did his hero agency internship with him and when Best Jeanist asked him about his hero name and told him that an alias represents what he wants to be and what he ought to be. So he asks him that when he becomes a second-year student and receives his provisional license, return to him and tell him his name. After the party's over, Katsuki and Izuku are approached by Shoto, who overheard that they have nowhere to go for their work studies. Shoto asks them if they would be interested in coming with him to intern at his father's agency. Katsuki and the others meet with Endeavor, and the current #1 hero doesn't hesitate to tell him or Izuku that he only accepted them because his son asked him to, and he would have preferred Shoto to come alone. Hearing this, Katsuki bluntly insults the pro hero, who's quite irritated, but thinking back to how All Might compared him and Endeavor. Katsuki tells him that he's looking forward to the training since he's #1 among the heroes. Suddenly, Endeavor runs off saying that he won't be wasting time training others than Shoto, telling them if they want to learn, then stay behind him, only to be surprised to see them already in their gear ready for action. Katsuki hears Endeavor repeat his order to stay behind him. A sonic boom goes off in the city while the boys try to keep up with their new employer. Katsuki complains that Endeavor took off before anyone even noticed the commotion, which takes more than just speed, and the hero berates him for not having the fortitude required. They found that a villain known as Star Servant is causing panic with his manipulation quirk. Endeavor's intervention forces the villain to flee down an alley and call his minions, being chased by Endeavor. When they come out of the other end, Star Servant's minions are ready to attack. The next moment, Izuku and Katsuki take on the minions directly. However, in an even faster flash, Hawks appears and effortlessly dispatches them with his feathers. After the villains are arrested, Hawks briefly chats with the 3 interns, with Katsuki not too fazed at meeting the second best hero and complains about him taking the action. Endeavor asks Hawks what he wants, to which Hawks deflects the question completely before promoting the Paranormal Liberation Front's book. Seeing how Japan's #2 hero recommends the book, Izuku expresses his desire to read it too, and Hawks gives him, Shoto, and Katsuki extra copies that he carried with him before leaving. Once they arrive at Endeavor Hero Agency, Endeavor asks his trainees what they want to achieve. Izuku says he wants to be able to control his power and use it with maximum performance. Endeavor recalls that he has a super strength quirk that's powerful but self-destructive. Katsuki is confused on how Endeavor understands Izuku's muttering. After listening to Katsuki and Shoto, Endeavor starts the work studies. He explains that his battle is governed by 3 fundamentals: rescue, evacuation, and battle. With his training, they'll make these processes their MO. Endeavor ends the lesson by telling Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki that, during the winter break, their task is to beat a villain faster than him, even if only once. During the following days, the 3 students try to surpass Endeavor's test, but the veteran hero always manages to catch the villains before them. Endeavor doesn't hesitate to criticize them, telling them in what facets they need to improve. A week later, Endeavor brings Shoto, Izuku, and Katsuki over to his house for dinner per his daughter's suggestion. Dinner starts well, but Katsuki becomes irritated with Izuku praising the food Fuyumi Todoroki cooked. But things end up quite awkward due to the complicated relationship between Endeavor and his children, and specifically due to Natsuo Todoroki's resentment towards his father, and after he finishes, he quickly leaves, unable to sit near his father. Katsuki is also aware of the situation, and when he asked him if he knew about Shoto's past, to which he reveals he was listening when the 2 of them were talking during the sports festival. Although it's clear that Endeavor regrets what he did and now tries to do his best for his family, it's hard for his children to forgive him. Izuku tells Shoto that he feels he's getting ready to forgive Endeavor, but he feels that if Shoto truly hated him, it would be fine to not forgive him. But Izuku voices his thoughts on that Shoto is a very kind person waiting for the right moment. Endeavor then comes in and tells the 3 of them that he'll be taking them to UA High School. While Endeavor's chauffeur drives them back to UA, Endeavor tells the boys that they'll have to keep going to his agency to continue the training on weekdays and weekends if their schedule allows. Just then, a villain appears in the middle of the road, holding Natsuo as a hostage, and calls out Endeavor to come face him. Endeavor leaps out of the car to save his son. The villain introduces himself as Ending and is obsessed with Endeavor and wants to kill him. Ending takes a step back when he sees the interns, giving Endeavor an opportunity to attack the off-balance villain. However, when he sees Natsuo being held in front of Ending, Endeavor slows down, not wanting to endanger him, and allowing the 3 students to pass him in order to rescue Natsuo and defeat the villain. Disappointed, Ending threatens to increase the death toll if the flame hero doesn't kill him, sending several incoming cars into the air. He also puts Natsuo directly in the path of a car, but Katsuki rescues him in an instant. As Natsuo's held in the grasp of Ending, Katsuki successfully condenses and releases his quirk while declaring that there will be no corpses if he can help it. With Natsuo safe, Katsuki watches Shoto attack Ending and defeat him. Katsuki is then caught with an embrace of Endeavor and Natsuo after the hero is relieved about his son. After escaping Endeavor's embrace and subduing Ending, Bakugo boasts about the fact that they managed to subdue a villain faster than Endeavor, but to Bakugo's surprise and annoyance, Endeavor doesn't object to Bakugo's statement, actually complimenting him and the other 2 for their speed and picking up his slack. He stands awkwardly as Endeavor and his son talk. Later, when Ending is taken by the authorities, Natsuo thanks Bakugo and asks for his hero name. Izuku assumes it's just Bakugo, but his childhood friend says it's not, and that he's already chosen a hero name. Izuku is curious to know what it is, but Bakugo refuses to reveal it, telling Izuku to go fall in a hole, adding that there's someone else he has to tell first. Paranormal Liberation War Arc. Upon returning to class, Class 1A heads to Ground Alpha to demonstrate what they learned from their work-study experiences. In the locker room, Katsuki hits Izuku in the head with his mask out of disgust, as Izuku's control over Black Whip was praised by his classmates. Outside, the class is surprised to see that All Might will be teaching the class, as Shota has been urgently called to Tartarus that day. The Endeavor Agency trio demonstrate at last, with Katsuki showing off his improved abilities, Shoto his enhanced speed, and Izuku his improved control over Black Whip. Later in the teacher's lounge, All Might meets with Katsuki and Izuku. He congratulates the two on their improvements and places a notebook on the table, which contains All Might's research into the past One for All users. Katsuki looks through All Might's research and notes that the fifth user was Daigoro Banjo, aka Lariat, whom possessed the Black Whip quirk. At first, Katsuki looks down on the original users and their quirks as being weak, but All Might tells him that All for One killed them as soon as he could since they defied his will, leaving them with no choice but to pass on their quirks. Katsuki asks Izuku what quirk he will unlock next, and Izuku answers with Float, the quirk of Nana Shimura. Katsuki denounces him since he's skilled enough with explosion that he can go airborne, leading the two to have an argument to All Might's humor. As Izuku trains with his classmates to prepare his quirks, Katsuki assists him with a training exercise called Catch Kacchan with Black Whip to catch him with Black Whip, only for Izuku to lose every time with Katsuki's explosions, leaving an afro on his head. Later, Katsuki tells All Might that he can't keep his secrets forever, and All Might tells him that great power puts others at risk, and it isn't just the wicked who seek power. Katsuki questions All Might about leaving out some of the information in the notebook, and dodging the subject when he asked him previously. All Might reasons that they're both worried for Izuku due to his own insecurities, and Katsuki replies that he ignored his own weaknesses so he bullied him in the past. All Might asks if Katsuki is doing this to atone, and he says Izuku won't see it that way, but All Might soothes him by comparing his relationship with Izuku to his own relationship with Endeavor, saying he'll get a chance to talk eventually. Months later, Katsuki accompanied the pro heroes and the other students of UA in the Paranormal Liberation Raid, originally in Burnin's team of heroes tasked with evacuating survivors. Suddenly, Tomura Shigaraki wakes up with his decay stronger than before, crumbling the entire city. As most of the heroes in the city escape, Katsuki joins Deku and Endeavor in pursuing and stopping Tomura. Tomura soon realizes that his quirks are being disabled due to Eraserhead's erasure, so he throws two quirk-destroying bullets at him. Katsuki manages to destroy one of them, but fails to stop the other as it hits his leg. But Eraserhead manages to cut it off before the effect could take place. Just as Tomura has the chance to decay all the heroes in his vicinity, Izuku suddenly activates Float while using Black Whip to carry all of the heroes out of range. Katsuki worriedly yells to Izuku to keep his distance, but the latter tells him that he's the only one who can stop Tomura from reaching the ground. As the two clash, Katsuki worries that Izuku has a high risk of dying, whether by Tomura's hand or expanding his body with his own quirks. He and Endeavor fly up to help Izuku, with Katsuki thinking about how he used to believe that One for All was a cursed power, until seeing how useful it was when All Might and Deku used it for their heroic deeds. As All for One possesses Tomura's body, the villain unleashes All for One's tendrils in order to steal One for All. Without thinking, Katsuki intercepts the attack and saves Deku's life, like Izuku did for him long ago. Katsuki tells the shocked Izuku not to play hero all by himself, and his falling self is caught by Shoto. Enraged by Tomura hurting his allies and friends, Izuku snaps and breaks his way through to Tomura, accidentally giving him the chance to steal One for All. Tomura, however, is unable to steal One for All, and the action stuns both him and Izuku. Ingenium arrives to help Katsuki and Endeavor, but the heroes are met by Gigantomachia and the League on his back. As Dabi prepares to attack the heroes after revealing his identity as Toya Todoroki, Best Jeanist falls from a plane and restrains the villains with wires. Katsuki smirks, seeing his former employer alive and active. Katsuki blasts his way to help Best Jeanist and Lemillion, and fights off the Nomu. Katsuki then reveals his official hero name, Great Explosion Murder God Dynamight. The name is met with disapproving thoughts, but amuses Lemillion, irritating Katsuki. As Gigantomachia weakens, Mr. Compress gouges himself to escape Best Jeanist's clutch, and takes Spinner and Tomura with him to open ground. Katsuki becomes too weak to stop Tomura and the League from escaping, and passes out, and is admitted to Central Hospital. 2 days after Tomura breaks out the convicts in Tartarus and prisons all over Japan, Katsuki wakes up, seemingly back to his naturally irritated state, making the visiting students relieved. Katsuki then asks them if everyone, including Izuku, Shoto, Endeavor, Aizawa, and Nejire, are alright. He notices grim looks on their faces and demands to know what's going on. Katsuki gets out of bed and starts running down the hallway to get to Izuku, with Rikido and Minoru trying to stop him. He angrily proclaims that if Izuku dies, he'll kill him. Katsuki is eventually carried off by Tsuyu, Minoru, and Rikido, angrily demanding to speak to Izuku, who's still unconscious. He notices Best Jeanist and Hux walking by to talk to Izuku about One for All. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Thanks for watching, I'm out.